Thank you, Rich. I'm really happy to do updates regarding my country, what is going on. And unfortunately, today is already 8 months and 2 days of full-scale Russian war in Ukraine. Um, I will cover damages from. I'm not covering the damages. I will cover the questions regarding the damages from the war. Also, we'll talk about progress of field work and commodity supply and demand. We will talk about Ukrainian agricultural exports and a little bit about world wheat market tendencies within this uh, situation, and also what we need to uh, do to rebuild our economy and agriculture. Um, as you know, for the latest several days and several weeks, the main target for Russian army became our power plants. They use hundreds of drones, kamikazes delivered from Iran, and for now, 40% of our energy system is destroyed. Due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, 90% of wind and up to 50% of solar energy have been decommissioned. It means that Ukraine is not able to export energy anymore. In 2021, Ukraine exported 3.5 billion kilowatts per hour, but due to termination of energy export, the budget will fall uh, short about 150 million euros every month. But it also means that Ukraine is limited for own consumption. This in turn causes disruptions in the supply of water and heat in the homes and enterprises. In the absence of electricity, what is the most dangerous, people will not hear the alarm sirens when the missile strikes are coming. As of September, the total amount of documented damage of Ukrainian economy amounted to more than 127 billion dollars. The largest share in the total volume of damages belong to residential buildings, almost 40% or $50.5 billion. The total number of destroyed or damaged housing stock is about 136,000 buildings. Among them, 120,000 are individual houses and almost 16,000 multi-apartment buildings. So it means that the housing of about 1.2 million households, or about 3 million people, is damaged or destroyed. In the second place, in terms of the amount of damages in the sphere of it is the sphere of infrastructure, 27.7% or 35.3 billion, in which 26.6 billion due to direct destruction of roads and $4.3 billion the total damage of railroads. The amount the amount of losses, direct losses to agriculture are also huge. For now, we counted them up to almost $7 billion. This includes damage of land, agricultural machinery, elevators, and other storage facilities, livestock, beekeeping, damage of perennial crops, damage of stolen inputs, stolen grain, and oilseeds. Currently, the loss of available cultivated area is more than 22%. The loss of irrigated land is over 70% because mostly that was located in Kherson region, the Zaporizhzhia region. Those regions that are occupied now. The loss of berry fields is about 25%, and the loss of orchards is 20%. The loss of livestock is up to 30%. The largest share of losses is destroyed and damaged agricultural machinery. Um, so the replacement and repair cost is estimated up to $3 billion. The second largest category is damaged and stolen grain and oilseeds, which uh, with an estimated value of $1.9 billion. The elevators and other storage capacity also suffered substantial damage, which noticeably limits Ukraine's ability to store the new harvest. The capacity of the destroyed storage facility is estimated at 6.5 million tons, while the capacity of partially damaged storage facilities reached almost 3 million tons. The estimated repair and replacement cost is estimated at $1.1 billion. Despite all complications, Ukrainian farmers bravely continued their work in order to feed people in Ukraine and around the world. And so far, we harvested almost 66% of our crops. The harvest of peas, wheat, barley, and rapeseed are actually almost completed. Unfortunately, our yields are much less than in previous year. Totally, for 27, more than 27%. The yield of wheat is 4.12 metric tons per hectare, which is 11% less. Barley 3.5 metric tons per hectare, which is 10% less. And the worst situation is actually regarding the corn. As you can see, it is 36% less for now as in 2021, but we just on a 12.5% harvest of planting area, and we believe that by the end of the harvest period, this amount will much higher. So due to the lower harvest, we didn't get previously estimated volume of crops. In September, the focus for wheat was 20.5 million tons, according to our estimate and according to the USDA estimate. But now it is understandable that Ukraine will have maximum 19.5 million tons. This is almost 15 million tons less than in 2021.
Okay, so let's maybe return me for a second for the previous slide. So as I told that our harvest is much more lower than we expected. For now, we harvested almost 66% of our grain and legumes, but we're almost done with wheat, barley, peas, and rapeseed. And in general, our yields are less for 27.6%. And for wheat, it is minus 11%, for barley minus 10% compared to the previous year. But the worst situation, as I told, that is for corn, minus 36%, because some crops are damaged or lost. But we believe that by the end, we're just now on the beginning of our harvest campaign for corn. So we believe that on the beginning to the end of the our harvest campaign, our estimates will be reached. So because actually we expect to harvest even more than we expected in previous months. We expect to harvest 33.6 million tons of corn compared to 31.5 estimated amount on a previous month due to liberated areas that now are under Ukrainian control. So, but as I said, the amount of wheat is less than we expected. USDA final report was 20.5 forecast million metric tons, but it's understandable now that we will get only 19.5, but that is 7 million metric ton less than in previous year. Unfortunately, military actions lead to a significant reduction in the harvesting area under winter crops, and as a result, a decrease in grain production, which negatively affects the farmers' finances. So this year, we expect to plant at least 63% of previous year. So 10% of surveyed farmers responded that they are not going to plant this fall, and they explained this decision in the most cases in the increase in the price of inputs, problems with the sale of grain, and low prices of grain and oilseeds in the market, and also some shortage of fuel. The majority of agri-producers in Ukraine, for the majorities of agri-producers in Ukraine, the issue of resource provision for fall planting is now very, very acute, since many agricultural enterprises have a very difficult financial situation or are very close to the bottom line. Not all of them are able to purchase the basic inputs for the winter planting campaign in time or in full, or they are afraid to make any reserves due to possible next attack from Russia. So according to the survey, the average availability of seeds among farmers is 74%, fuel 54%, protection plant protection products is about 60%, and fertilizers about 45-46%. Agri-producers in Khmelnytsky, Vinnytsia, and Lviv region are the most supplied with fertilizers, plant protection products, and fuel, and also Vinnytsia, Volyn, and Khmelnytsky with seeds, but that is because they are more close to the west of Ukraine. So as for now, our sowing campaign is in progress, and usually in Ukraine from 2019 to 2021, the share of winter crops in the total sown area under agricultural crops was around 32%, or 9 million 9 million hectares. So last year, Ukrainian farmers planted more than 7 million hectares with winter grain for harvest 2022, but unfortunately, to military actions, we had significant reduction in the harvesting area under winter crops, because they were mostly on the east and south territories. And this year, as I told, we expect to plant at least 63% compared to the previous year. For now, we are done with winter rape seeds, and we planted even more than we expected. The mostly regions that are like pioneers, first one, that is actually Mykolaiv and Odessa region, that is actually very close to military actions, but still they did good job, and they already harvested the most, the bigger area of winter crops. Also, some regions like Kiev, even it had some restrictions during the Russian occupation. They still have planted already winter crops, but still it is much less compared to the previous year. It's only 62% of previous year. It's the same with many other regions. So for now, we have almost 76% planted compared to our forecast. This is our latest Ukrainian balance of supply and demand of grain and legumes as of October 14. For some commodities, the marketing year 2021-22 is still in progress, and thanks to increased export due to unblocked 3 Black Sea ports, our ending stocks are declining. Now it is 13.4 million tons, which is 1.5 million tons less than in previous months, but it is still 2.3 time bigger than usually. Our expectations for the next marketing year will depend on the development of the military situation in Ukraine and possibilities to plant, harvest, and export agricultural commodities. We expect to harvest in 2022-23 marketing year around 53 million metric tons of grain and legumes, which is much less, as you can see, almost 33 million tons less than in previous year. Our consumption estimates on the level around 19 million tons. That is 7 million tons less than in previous year, but pretty close to our usual amount. This year, our domestic consumption was high due to high losses of grain because of the war. One of the most important sphere in agriculture productions in Ukraine is sunflower seeds and sunflower oil productions. And for several last years, Ukraine was a leader in sunflower oil export. Ukraine's oil industry is export-oriented. As you can see, usually we processed 97-98% of our sunflower seeds, and around 90% of this oil that was produced, we exported. Last year, more than 80% of export, unfortunately, were sunflower meal, and because that was some disruptions. And since the beginning of the war, the sunflower became the leader with a share of more than 38%. Unfortunately, processing products currently is only about 40%. This season, sunflower export from Ukraine, sunflower seeds export from Ukraine reached a historic high amount to 1.63 million tons, which occurs due to suspensions of sunflower oil export and significant reduction in oil processing within the country. So under an optimistic scenario for the next this year and next year, we expect that about 11 up to 11.6 million tons on sunflower seeds can be processed in the new season. But that is if the ports will continue to work. If we will not able to export sunflower oil, there is no necessity actually to produce it, and then it raises another problem where to store, where to find enough storage for sunflower seeds as well as for sunflower oil. So if the ports will be blocked again, this amount may not exceed even 8 million tons. So usually 97% of sunflower oil were exported by sea, and after the Black Sea ports were unblocked, those 3 ports around Odessa, the market is gradually started recovered, and volume of oil production and export is increasing every month. So on the optimistic scenario, we expect that the potential of Ukraine for production of sunflower oil will amount about 5 million tons, and that is pretty close to our previous marketing year. So it means that we will keep leading position in sunflower oil export. So despite the war, we continue to work and continue to feed the world, and we try to use all alternative methods of delivering our products abroad. So the volume of export of grain and legumes from Ukraine in 2022-23 marketing year, as on October 26, as for today actually, is 12.1 million tons, but that is 33% less than last season's on the same day. 4.6 million tons of wheat have been shipped since the beginning of the season, including 1.6 million tons in October, which is 43% less than last year's October volume. The supply of barley to foreign markets amounted more than 1 million tons, but still much less than in previous year. Also, 2,000 tons of rice were exported in October, which is significantly less than in previous year. But in the same time, 6.5 almost 6.5 million tons of corn were exported, which is 3 times higher than the volume of shipment on the same date last season. This is explained by the fact that a lot of corn previously accumulated due to the blockade of the ports, and now we try to empty our storage to get prepared for the new harvest of corn, which is coming. The export of flour from Ukraine in this marketing year already amounted 3.4 thousand tons, and you know that first months of the beginning of war, our export dropped significantly, but since May, we increased export for cereals in 4 times, oil crops in 3 times, vegetable oils in 2.5 times. So we try to find find all methods and try use all alternative roads to export as much as possible. Actually, since the beginning of war, counting from March 1st to the middle of October, we already exported almost 23 million metric tons of agricultural commodities, including 9 million tons of corn, which is 40% of total amount, 4.6 million of wheat, which is 20% of agricultural export, more than 2 million tons of sunflower oil, which is 9.4% of total amount, and almost 2 million tons of rapeseed, which is 8.4 million ton, 8.4% of the total amount. So the seaport blockade has led to a substantial reduction in grain exports through ports, but still now due to the unblocking those seaports, mostly all commodities goes through seaport. Before this structure was different. Railway has had much higher share, but now for all commodities, port export predominates. But unfortunately, before the war, our monthly capacity for exports through Black Sea ports was 6 to 7 million tons per month, up to 8 million tons per month. But since the beginning of the war, we exported only 14.5 million tons. That is our kind of like even less than our 2 months capacity. It means that we're much behind of our export potential. Anyhow, we're increasing our export, and compared to previous months, we can see a really good dynamic. And even on the middle of October, we have already more than half of September export, mostly for all types of transportation. Talking about railway, as I told at the beginning, railway was the main, at the beginning of war, railway was the main road to export Ukrainian agricultural products to Europe. And at the beginning, the share of railway transportation through the land border crossing predominated, but as you can see now, 82% of all railway transportation of grain cargoes goes to seaports. It leads to high increasement of total export and also export by railway. So for now, in September, we already transported for export by railway 3.2 million tons, which is even 97% more than in previous months, almost double it since August. But I just want to emphasize that it's not all that went abroad through railway. It includes also the amount of the grain that was shipped to seaports and then was delivered to other countries. So we are talking a lot about this grain agreement that's been signed between United Nations, Ukraine, Turkey, and Russia. And as I told previously in my previous webinars, this agreement works pretty good. The Joint Coordination Center for Grain Corridor was organized in Istanbul, and representatives from different countries were doing the kind of check, control of ships and cargoes that were going through Bosphore. And as for October 24th, already 383 voyages have carried 8.6 million metric tons of grain and other foodstuff from Ukrainian ports. And if we would see the structure of this execution of the agreement, the tonnage structure, we can see that corn predominate, and the share of corn is 42%. That is because we, as I told previously, we try to empty our storages to be ready for new harvest, and also almost 30% that is wheat. Then 7.6 that is canola and rape seeds, 6.5% that is sunflower oil, and almost 6% sunflower meal, and almost 5% is barley. So in terms of ports that are in use, unfortunately, still Pivdenney port, which is the biggest actually port in Ukraine, used the less because of some, I guess, damages there. But this agreement was signed only for 120 days, and in November, the day of the term of this agreement will expire. And actually, Russia is doing everything to break the deal, and they again request to lift more sanctions in order to extend this agreement. I personally believe that sanctions will not be lifted, and this agreement will extend it. But also, since October 14, Russian inspectors in the Joint Coordination Center in Istanbul have been significantly delaying the inspections of ships that are heading to the port of Ukraine to load grain, or are already loaded and heading to their final destinations. As a result of this action, more than 165 ships are currently stuck near Bosphorus, and their number is increasing every day. President of Russia thought that mostly all vessels, all cargoes were going to Europe. As you can see from these diagrams, that is not true. A lot of cargoes went to different countries, including Africa, Asia, and Turkey actually has one of the biggest share in this structure, the biggest in terms of vessels that arrived to Turkey, 129, or they got 14% of all commodities transported through this grain corridor. On the second place is Spain in terms of quantity of ships, but the first place in terms of share of tonnage. On the third place, Italy, then China, New Zealand, Egypt, Bangladesh, Romania, Germany, India, France, etc. But I would like also to emphasize that if even grain or other commodities goes to any country like in Europe, it doesn't mean that this is their final destinations. Nobody knows what kind of agreements those companies have. Maybe they deliver to other countries, because so far we can see that Europe has pretty good also harvest, and the estimates for their harvest next year increased by USDA report, and they have some surplus of grain, so they can deliver to other countries as well, including Ukrainian grain. So we already started to talk about world situation. So I did some comparison of forecast, USDA forecast for September and October. As I already told that Europe have some higher amount now, higher forecast for 2.7 million metric tons. For the rest country like China, India, and Australia, Pakistan, that is almost the same. For Ukraine, the estimates was 20.5, but as I told, that is not real. It will be 19.5. But the most interesting for me, that is Russia, of course, because they already reported, the Ministry of Agriculture already reported more than 102 million metric ton of wheat, but according to the USDA report, it's still 91. And they noted in their report that according to the sensing indicators throughout the growing season, including vegetation health index and a normalized difference vegetation index, they don't see that this harvest can be so much higher than their previous, like in 2021-22, that was 75.2, and now they report like 102 million metric tons, and it can be more even. So it means that they include stolen Ukrainian grain from Ukrainian territory into their reports, that grain that came from Kherson region, from Zaporizhia region, and some other regions. In terms of export and import, the USDA report didn't change a lot, as it was previously. Ukraine is going probably, we believe, export around 11 million metric tons, but that is 7 million less than, almost 8 million metric tons less than in previous year. But estimates for Russia is much higher than previous year, that is 42 million metric tons compared to 33 in the previous year. There are some differences in United States due to the weather situation. The production is expected less, but the export could be the same, maybe because of usage of ending stocks that America had before. The import structure didn't change a lot. That is still Indonesia, Egypt, and Turkey are the leaders. Dynamic of world demand and supply changed a little bit. The domestic consumption decreased, the total supply decreased, and but also export and ended stocks will expected lower than in previous months. But that is still, if we are talking about export, it's much higher than in previous 2021-22 marketing year. Few words about prices. As we can observe during the last few weeks, we can see that prices are dropping, and especially for Ukrainian grain. Now for food wheat, it is $310 American dollars per ton, but for feed wheat is even $265 dollars per metric ton. So compared to the world prices, our prices are the lowest in a world market. You will have this presentation, those slides, so if you are interested more detailed in those prices, you can check later these tables. So now the most important for Ukraine is start to rebuild our agriculture and our economy in general, and we cannot wait till the end of the war, because every day destructions are getting worse and worse, and we need to get resilient and recover our economy. But it also important just to not rebuild what we have before, but also it is necessary to modernize the all equipment, facilities, technologies to ensure our competitiveness in a world. And one of the important things is also continue our integration process into the European Union. We already ratificate almost 65% of our different legislation statements, and we are continue working on that. But it is very important for us, like key issues for preconditions for our future recovery. That is, of course, the mining and restoration of critical infrastructure, because thousands of kilometers of roads and railroads and bridges are destroyed, and 270,000 square kilometers needs humanitarian demining, and it can take years to get that done. Another issue that is important of us is ensuring a sufficient level of export. So, as I told, first of all, extension of the grain initiative, but it also would be good to lift blockade and develop other Black Sea ports. We have many Black Sea ports, and also create an alternative export routes, for example, through Danube river that I told before, that it's not deep enough, and it's necessary to do some project of deep navigation. And also we need to build, we actually work already with Europe building new railway hubs and doing joint custom controls to improve the situation, but we still need to have alternative roads, just in terms if Black Sea ports will get blockade. Also, restoration of reclamation infrastructure. Our irrigation system need to be rebuilt, and even built more on new areas, like 1 million hectares, that our expectation for irrigation systems, and a half of a million for drainage systems that needed to improve our agriculture. And also talking about elevators, I know that already USAID have a project in Ukraine which help one of the key issue, that is helping farmers with elevators, like portable elevators, and also plastic bags for preserving some grain, but also we don't have enough elevators on a border we almost don't have elevators like with Romania, Slovakia, due to Carpathian Mountains, but also not enough elevators near Romania, near Poland. So building new elevators will help us to use those alternative roads to Europe. But also talking about our rebuilding post-conflict, it is necessary also to understand that we need to achieve new goals. For example, achieving energy independence through the development of bioenergy production, construction of 333 plants for processing of agricultural crops and silage to biogas, provision of to the market with 2 billion cubical meters of domestically produced gas will help us to reach this goal. Also organizing a rebuilding around the principle of zero carbon future with a minimal reliance of fossil fuel. It is important for us to go according to the EU Green Deal and implement climate smart agricultural technologies. Also very important for future Ukrainian agriculture and agri-food complex in general, that is the transition from the raw material model of agricultural export to the export of goods with higher added value. For now, actually, raw materials the share of raw materials export is over 55%, and just primarily processing products is 35%, but we would like to have like 50% at least of more high processed product. Also, another hot question, that is development of seed production. Actually, our bank of seeds was destroyed due to the missile attacks, and before the war we also imported almost 40% of hybrid seeds. So creating and building our seed production will help to resolve our economy. Another question, that is agricultural insurance system. Actually, before the war, what probably surprising for American farmers, only 5% of total area of agricultural land was insured, and mostly farmers didn't think that that is important, but observing here how farmers works with insurance companies, I think that would protect them not only from climate changes, but it also due to this kind of destruction, like from the war. Also, since our orchards and berry fields are destroyed, we need to reduce our import dependence of vegetable fruits and berries, and we expect that setting out new berry fields on the area of almost 50,000 hectares will be done, as well as new orchards on the area of 230,000 hectares. And also we need to form our meat and dairy independence. Actually, in the registration list, I saw the question regarding the livestock, how much we have livestock and what is the structure. Do many farmers have like more than 1,000 cows per farm? It is kind of 15%, and if there is some interest, I can send this table, like grouping of different farms according to the heads of cows and pigs and poultry, everything. And also, I don't know if you guys know that last year we just lifted the moratorium of land market. So now only 1 year we can sell our land, and because of the war, this process was freezed, and our budget didn't get money enough. But I think that if land can be sold, but not only rent, but be private, it will help to ensure long-term investment into land, for example, for building irrigation system, or to set orchards or wherever. and so returning of the land to economic circulation that was not in use, and development of land market development, land market will help Ukraine to recover from the war and crisis. But my opinion that Ukrainian new agrarian policy cannot be considered in isolation. It is necessary to take into account the social aspect of the development in rural area, to rebuild the social infrastructure and create favorable conditions for the return of refugees and internally displaced persons to their normal place of residence, if it is possible. So that's what I wanted to tell you today. Thank you so much. Sorry for those technical issues. And if there are some questions, I will be happy to answer them.
There's a couple questions in the chat box. One is, can you comment on the reasons why prices are low for oilseeds and legumes within Ukraine? You had the chart with regards to prices, and just what is pulling those prices down?
What is pulling those prices down? That is because our oilseed production, sunflower oil and our other oil production very depends from the export. And since we do not export enough oil, we have a huge surplus of sunflower seeds. And if it's surplus, it's just the law of demand and supply, the price is go down.
The next question is along the price in terms of how much of the discount on the Ukraine price versus Russia is due to higher freight and insurance costs, war risk premiums. Is that what's causing the Ukrainian price to be lower than the Russian price? And again, I think that was a few slides back where you had the relative prices of FOB prices.
Let me return to that slides.
That one.
Okay, so the reason why the prices for Russia is higher than Ukraine, that is because Russia is not, first of all, under the war. Of course, and that is not regarding insurance. That is only because of the military situation, that it's more easier for Russia to move the grain and other foodstuff from their country rather than from Ukraine. Usually on the past, our prices were the same for many years.
Antonina, this is Dan. I wonder also if sanctions are still affecting the ability of countries to trade with Russia, so that apples to apples, everything else being equal, if there's more difficulty in just doing transactions with Russia, or some countries have just decided that they're not going to for political reasons, for geopolitical reasons, that could come into play too, I would think.
Yes, I agree.
What we're going to do here is build a little bit on some of Antonina's comments with regards to thinking about the whole aspect of wheat and conflict. And unfortunately, Ukraine has been part of the conflict both in World War I and World War II with regards to the importance of what is occurring. As Antonina indicated, we have been in this situation now for more than 8 months. Certainly the conflict has ebbed and flowed with certain discussion of escalation. For example, a couple weekends ago, the Crimean bridge that linked Russia with Crimea was blown, and certainly that has ended up, rightly or wrongly, of an escalation of fighting within Ukraine more destruction in terms of Antonina in her presentation indicated that roughly 40% of the power plants in Ukraine have been dismantled with the war destruction. There is, from time to time over the weekend, there was more discussion perhaps of nuclear escalation with regards to dirty bombs or things like that. Again, it's very difficult to think about and certainly something that you don't want to think about. Ultimately, some have wondered about a possible third world war in terms of would this conflict have the ability to escalate beyond just the limited area that's occurring now. And so in some respects, economic warfare has become more common, and there's reasons why it has become more common. But it is important to realize that many conflicts have a significant economic component. And many times when wars are fought now, there is a process or a desire upon the aggressor to destroy, in some respects, the economic infrastructure. Also, economic conflict occurs through embargoes, banking transaction limits, blockades, other trade restrictions. And so certainly that economic component of warfare, sadly, is much more important. Food has been intertwined with conflict. There's two ways that food will be used, certainly in terms of as people get hungry, all of a sudden they decide maybe this warfare effort isn't needed, and popular sentiment begins to turn about against the governments to come up with negotiations to end that conflict. Also, there is the whole aspect with regards to the efficiency of warfare. In terms to keep war going, soldiers have to be well fed. And if they're not well fed, not well taken care of, many times the will to fight begins to wane. And so certainly economics and food are really important with regards to that. In terms of looking at World War I, certainly economic blockades really affected the outcome of World War I. World War II, there was a strong desire, both on the part of Germany and on the part of Japan, to acquire additional agricultural land to provide food for their urban population. Also, some of us can remember the Soviet Union, Afghanistan, and the U.S. wheat embargo in terms of the effects that had, certainly for agricultural around the world. Also, when you begin to look at food in warfare, sometimes there is the possibility and desire on the part of some to inflict hunger and sometimes even starvation, which, again, we tend not to think about. We are becoming very familiar with Ukraine and Russia and their agricultural production in terms of export markets and the production. Again, from a production perspective, Ukraine and Russia do produce 30% of the world's wheat, 15% of the world's corn, and roughly 60% of the world's sunflower oil. And then when you look at exports, they're much more important from an export perspective. In terms of thinking about economic warfare, increased efficiency in transportation really enhanced the ability to have additional economic warfare. In terms of going back to 1800 to 1913, the world output doubled. However, if you read Kuznets, trade increased by a factor of 11. And so essentially, while you have a factor of 2 with regards to increasing world output, Kuznets argued the trade increased by a factor of 11, really increasing that. According to Lambert, between 1868 and 1902, the cost of shipping wheat fell by 75%. And so having that price fall by 75%, essentially comparative advantage was allowed to kick in and take hold with regards to specialization of the production of the commodities and then trading them. What's interesting is that different countries took very different paths as the cost of transportation fell. Britain essentially moved to more of a trade philosophy with regards to we will allow someone else to produce wheat and we will trade for it. Other countries, though, ended up with very much more of a self-sufficiency. And so the whole issue of self-sufficiency and comparative advantage many times has in history has caused countries to behave differently. With that decrease at 75% in the cost of transportation, moving wheat from the US or Odessa to Britain became very feasible. However, the downside of that is supply chains become long and they become subject to disruption. And also they become targets for military action in terms of essentially by disrupting those supply chains, there can be important ramifications from an economic perspective. The production of wheat, again, in terms of looking at this, and one of the places that this is important is that if you look at Antonina's map of destruction in war, a lot of the area of Ukraine that has been taken over by Russia is the heavy wheat production area. And then if you look at the Russian map on the right side there, you end up seeing that a lot of Russians' wheat production is in that same area in terms of just to the east and southeast of Ukraine. You see a lot of Russian wheat production. It's also important to realize that wheat is primarily an export commodity for Ukraine. To give an indication, Ukraine, the last year of available data, exported 73% of the wheat produced. They consumed 27%. And so with that production of wheat, most of it's for the export market. In 2020, Egypt purchased 3.1 million tons. Indonesia purchased 2.7 million tons. Bangladesh, 1.2 million tons. Turkey, 1 million tons. And so if you add those up, essentially that gets you very quickly to 9 million tons. And if, for example, you saw a reduction in Ukrainian wheat production of 10 million tons, or if 10 million tons would not be available, essentially that is more than the exports of Egypt, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and Turkey. And so essentially that amount of wheat production certainly ends up wiping out the top 4 buyers of wheat, at least in 2020. And so again, I think that gives you an indication of the scale that is there. Again, we're also assuming that if Ukraine produces that wheat, and certainly Antonina has some numbers there that indicate that in 2023, wheat production in Ukraine could be looking at a third reduction in terms of normal production just from seedings that have occurred so far. Again, more seedings could occur and seedings could exceed the expectations of what the government is projecting. But certainly 23 actually could be larger if you look at the seedings on the wheat market than we saw in 2022. Just to get an indication with regards to, let's say we reduced 10 million metric tons of wheat available off the world market, what would that do in terms of effective population? According to FAO in 2019, wheat consumption is roughly about 66 kilograms per capita. If you do the mathematics there, essentially that would affect 151 million people. And so again, the size of a $10 million reduction kind of transfers or translates into average wheat consumption for roughly 152 million people. And so again, that begins to give, I think, sometimes a scale effect of what is occurring. This graph here basically is kind of looked at what has happened to wheat price over the current conflict. One of the things you'll end up seeing is that wheat from July 2021 until February 2022 was kind of increasing slightly from that $7 per bushel range into the $8 range. Once the conflict started in February 22, wheat price jumped roughly over 50% to close to $13 per bushel. It then fell kind of into March. We had another escalation in May when it almost retraced up to the $13. It then fell into the $9 range. And so where we are now, wheat price is roughly about 13% higher than before the conflict, and about 13% higher than where we are. And so looking at this, one of the things we wanted to look at is just what happened around World War I and World War II to the wheat price situation. And is there patterns that we can learn in terms of when was the most difficult increase in prices? Was it during the war stage? Was it after the war stage? Those types of things. The other thing I think that is important to realize, I think, that is going to make this conflict very difficult to solve is just the geographic boundaries and what people end up thinking about with regards to what are their natural boundaries. We have two maps here of Ukraine roughly around the same period. These are kind of in the 1914, 1918 period. But if you look at the map of Ukraine on the left, essentially, Ukraine at that point had access to Crimea. It had access actually into some of the land into the Caucasus. And if you think back of that production region of where Russian wheat is produced, again, a highly productive wheat producing area within Russia. And then if you look kind of at the same point in time, what Russia views as their territory in terms of they end up viewing Kiev and Crimea and even a lot of Ukraine as kind of their natural territory. In some respects, I almost liken this to the whole issue of a fence law or a fence property line debate. In order to kind of have and keep peace, you need to have an agreement of where the boundaries are. And in some respects, geopolitically, I think this is going to be very difficult to think through and negotiate simply because what map you begin with, whether or not you begin with the one on the left or one on the right, will play a very important role with regards to negotiations and just who is giving up what. And so in some respects, I think it's very important to realize from a geopolitical standpoint, the differential of ultimately what is Ukraine's natural land space and what is Russia's natural land space, and working through those issues from a negotiation perspective, I think is going to be extremely difficult. Again, in terms of looking at this, the Ukraine map, the one on the left has Ukraine, Crimea is in their territory, and then also some of that northeast of the Black Sea region is also in the Ukrainian heritage, at least from that map. The same region, however, is viewed as being part of Russia. And so I think from the geopolitical perspective, I think it's going to be very difficult to come to a political solution with regards to where those are when the maps of what historically has been that Ukrainian area is in dispute between the two countries. My reading, and Antonina certainly can look at this, but Ukraine as a nation state at least what we have available in the U.S. literature is traced back to about 1918. And before that, Ukraine was part of various empires. However, you can trace the Ukrainian language back to 1816. And so, again, in terms of what is Russia, what is Ukraine, is there. But the important thing, I think, from an agricultural perspective is a large amount of the wheat production area, both of Russia and of Ukraine, are kind of in that area with regards to dispute, with regards to the natural area. Again, I found this from the University of Rochester. It kind of gives a good indication of just how Ukraine territorial growth, how that changed from 1922 to 1954. Again, you can kind of see where it was in terms of the 1917 to 1921 area, 1924, and then you can end up seeing how that territory changed over the years into the 1950s, where Russian Crimea was given to Ukraine in the 1950s. And so, again, you'll have these slides, and there's a lot of information on these slides to think about with regards to just what is the territory. In terms of thinking about World War I and World War II, we'll spend a little bit of time looking at this. One of the things I think that's important to realize is in World War I, it started with an assassination of the Archduke of Austria, June 28, 1914. And then war was declared on August 4th. In terms of the shortage of bread was a huge issue for the UK in World War I. They ended up securing meat and sugar, but they made a conscious decision that they weren't going to worry about wheat, simply because there were 7 major suppliers around the world that ended up providing those wheat. And 90% of the wheat exported at that time was by 7 nations. Those nations are Argentina, Australia, Canada, India, Romania, Russia, and the US. I think it's important to realize that Ukraine would be considered within Russia with regards to that area, in terms of, at least if you look at the history at that point in time, they did not make a separation between Russia and Ukraine. Whether or not that's correct or not certainly is an important distinction. And so what I ended up doing here is going back using USDA NAS and kind of looking at kind of what happened with regards to prices on the wheat market. One of the things that is important to realize is that August of 1918 was kind of one of the important cornerstones of what was going on. And so if you look at here, essentially, kind of before the war started, wheat was down around 75 cents per bushel. Once the war broke out, essentially from August of 1914, you saw an increase in wheat almost up to $1.30, $1.40. Then wheat came back. And then as the war went on, essentially 1916, 1917, you saw wheat actually go from 75 cents, where it was before the war, to $2.50. And so it's important to realize that some of the effects on the world wheat market and the wheat price were very much delayed. There was a fall to about $2. Incidentally, the U.S. administration put on a floor of wheat of $2 in the Woodrow Wilson administration. And then you kind of saw wheat creep up a little bit. And then they began to take those restrictions off, and the price spiked. It came down, and then it spiked again up until over $2.50, and then it went down. To maybe allow you to look at this, from 1884 to 1913, the average price of wheat was about 73% per bushel. The standard deviation was about 14% per bushel. And so what that means is that the movement of wheat price up or down wasn't dramatic, in terms of there wasn't a lot of volatility with regards to that. In May of 1914, before World War I broke out, the price of wheat was 84 cents. By April 1915, the price increased to 136 per bushel, roughly a 136% increase. Turkey had closed off the transport routes. And so that essentially froze Romania and Russia out of the ability to source wheat through the Black Sea. And so essentially 2 out of the 7 were gone. Canada happened to suffer a drought that year, and then also an early freeze closed shipping through the Great Lake region. And so a third exporter fell. Australia basically had almost a complete failure of their production. And so basically that knocked out a fourth supplier. Argentina export availability decreased by 10%, again, due to planting conditions and weather conditions. So a fifth of the 7 were gone. And then India embargoed exports, causing 6, leaving basically the export market from 7 areas to 1, the U.S. What's interesting to look about and think about this is we've had some situations where India has embargoed now. And so we've also had, for example, drought in the U.S. And so, again, it's just kind of interesting to go back and think about what occurred from history in that. One of the things people sometimes think about is, well, just what is the importance of Turkey? There's 2 straits there that are extremely important. One of them, Antonina mentioned in her presentation with regards to Bosphorus, with regards to that strait. And that is where the inspection of exports from Ukraine and Russia are occurring. Essentially, that strait and then the Strait of Dardanelles basically is how wheat moves out of the Ukraine-Russia area to the rest of the world, with those 2 straits basically opening up to the Mediterranean Sea to allow wheat to move through those. Turkey controls those. Essentially, the minimum width on Bosphorus essentially is 2,300 feet. And so blockades are somewhat reasonably able to be enforced with regards to that, because all of that traffic needs to be able to squeeze by an area of less than a half a mile. The length of that strait is 19 miles. And then you have Dardanelles, which is a little bit wider, but still at the minimum point, it's only 3/4 of a mile wide. And so the length of that is 38 miles. And so from a geopolitical perspective, Turkey becomes very important with regards to movement of commodity out of the Russia and out of the Ukrainian region, simply because these 2 straits are fairly easy to control from a military perspective, simply because they're not that wide. In terms of, as we begin to look at wheat price comments kind of around World War I, after April 1915, the price of wheat fell back to $1 per bushel and remained there until 2016. Until a month before the U.S. entered the World War, prices increased to $1.72 per bushel. And then they ended up, after the U.S. entered World War I, prices increased to $2.47. We talked about the imposition of the price floor guarantee of $2 in U.S. production by the Wilson administration. Prices were high until 1920. And then essentially immediately after the restraints were removed, prices increased a little bit. And then they decreased back to $1 per bushel. Again, a little bit more than what it was before the war. But again, in terms of just thinking about that, there were huge ramifications. And in some respects, the ramifications were somewhat muted at the beginning of the period. And managing that afterwards became extremely important. In terms of some of the lessons learned from World War I, preparation for food supplies really had a devastating effect, especially with wheat. in terms of Britain ended up having bread riots in that, which basically certainly creates pressure on governments in terms of whether or not there's the will on the part of the country to consider military conflict. The other thing is weather and other forces have the ability to confound that. Blockades and our embargoes were also exacerbated by banking issues and weather. And so what it's kind of interesting to look at in terms of when the conflict began, there were banking effects, there were blockades, there were embargoes. And so it's not like we've learned anything new since World War I. How those resolve themselves certainly could be different, but it is there. Again, most of us are familiar with the World War II dates. I just put them in there because, again, we're going to look at some maps of prices there. But from September 1, 1939, that was the invasion of Poland by Germany. Britain and France declared war on Germany. The U.S. became involved December 7th, 1941. The war ended in Japan in September 1945 and in Europe in May of 1945. A little bit different in terms of England, France, Russia, U.S., and Italy and Japan were aligned in World War I. Italy and Japan were aligned with Germany in World War II, while England, France, Russia, the U.S. Continued to be aligned in World War II. Supply routes were actually more difficult in World War II than World War I. And in some respects, the supply chain routes, I think, are more complex now than they were back in the World War II area. World War I was focused more on staples in terms of wheat. That was more of an issue. World War II, the food issues became more protein, dairy, poultry, and then the fruits and vegetables. In terms of thinking through this, and there's always more objectives, and sometimes these objectives are not found until historians go back and look at some of the decisions that were made prior to conflict. But one of Germany's objectives was to obtain additional agricultural land to feed the German population, their urban populations. And this was also kind of a motivation with regards to Japan, in that Germany and Japan were both concerned that they didn't have agricultural resources to feed their population. And so Britain and some of the other countries took a very different aspect with regards to food needs, with regards to embracing trade, while Germany and Japan basically embraced self-sufficiency. One of the individuals that was pretty instrumental with regards to World War II, especially from the food perspective, was Herbert Bach, probably a name that you may not have heard before. But essentially, he was an agronomist. He was working on a PhD. He went to defend his dissertation. He did not pass his PhD defense. And so essentially, he left. He ended up joining into the German movement, the nationalist movement. He rose to the ranks to essentially become the main advisor with regards to agriculture for Hitler. And one of the things that he developed was known as a hunger plan. And he convinced Hitler to essentially divert Ukrainian grain from the Soviet Union cities to Germany. And essentially the plot there, or the aspect there, was essentially to reduce or eliminate the Soviet urban population via starvation. Essentially, he was wanting, or the target was to essentially starve 30 million Russians out of the Moscow type region. The hope was that Ukraine could produce enough feed to feed the army and then also supplement Germany. And so while there's other motivations for World War II, I think it's important to realize, based on historical record, that food and agriculture was part of it. And in some respects, the plan was to move German farmers into Ukraine to essentially farm the land to displace the Ukrainian farmers. In 1941, the plan was to be limited, food to be limited to Kiev and Kharkov, and then not to be brought into any of those cities in 1942. And so essentially 7 million tons of Ukrainian grain was moved to Germany in 1942. And so this moving Ukrainian grain into different countries is not new in this conflict. Ultimately, Bach's plan failed due to the resistance of German farmers. They had no interest in going to Ukraine. And then also Ukrainian farmers presented a resistance there that made it very uncomfortable for German farmers to move into that area. And so while the plan failed, I think from a historical record, it is important to realize the centralness of Ukraine and just the use of food as a weapon. Germany was able to better feed their population in World War II compared to World War I. However, that was difficult in terms of they changed the quality of flour by essentially increasing the amount of bran allowed in flour. In 1944, Ukraine was no longer under German control, and the situation deteriorated in Germany. Only the U.S. ended in a healthy economic state compared to all the other combated countries, with the U.S. producing the highest yields. And so it is important to realize that all the combatants in World War II ended up in a difficult situation through that war. Now going back to looking at wheat prices, the dates become pretty important with regards to what's going on. Again, you see that wheat was around 50 cents per bushel. In the 1939s, it moved up with some of the conflict to about 84 cents, then it dropped. Then you saw a gradual increase in prices. But what's interesting is that the price effects were most severe after the end of World War II. Essentially, World War II ended in the 1945s, but essentially you saw the major run-up in prices into the 1947, 1948 area. And so just by using history to kind of indicate what's going on, between February 1939 and April 1940, with the increase of war, we saw an increase in wheat prices by about 56%. From April until August that year, prices fell by 30% due to an excellent 1940 U.S. crop. From February 1941 to the end of the war, wheat prices doubled. And then from the end of the war to January 1948, wheat prices doubled again. Part of this due to a failed crop in Ukraine and in Russia. Production also was limited due to the destruction of infrastructure and the productive capacity of agriculture. And so I think as we look at this war and conflict continuing, the importance of the destruction in infrastructure and the ability of productive capacity to come on seems to have a long time frame. And while I think it's important to plan for Ukraine after the end of the conflict, I think it's important to realize, at least from the experience of World War II, that infrastructure destruction and productive capacity of agricultural destruction, the demining and those types of things carried on well into the 1947, 1948 type time frame. And so if history is any what of an indicator of the future, I think that's one of the things to think about. Maybe a quick epilogue of World War I and World War II. Wheat and other agricultural economies were important factors. Certainly conflicts exacerbated that. Food basically pressures an end to conflict when nutritional needs are not being met. The rich agricultural areas around Ukraine were important both in the conflicts of WW1 and WW2. The other one I think that's kind of interesting to look at around that same area is the wheat embargo, the Russian grain deal. Certainly this is a graph from 72 to 1980. You saw the rapid run up in 1973 wheat price, basically a doubling of price when the Russian grain deal was there. You then saw a gradual decrease as that embargo occurred and as people realized ways around it, and in a run-up. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Some of us have memories and have lived through this situation, and so that's certainly there. In terms of, I'll finish up with relation to the current situation. One of the things that I think is important is just the damage to the ports and the ability to ship commodity. In terms of destruction at Maripol, a number of other ports are there. Certainly there is wheat going out of those, Odessa and some of the other ports, but again, I think it's pretty fragile. I think there's been a change in the amount of land planted in Ukraine, and we may actually see a bigger change in the 2023 crop year than the 2022 crop year, especially given some of the information coming out with regards to planting intentions of winter crops that are occurring now, and whether or not those intentions are correct, and then whether or not farmers actually are able to get that land planted. Labor, fuel, agricultural imports, storage, transportation, they're probably going to be critical moving forward in terms of these are supply chains that will probably take a period of time to restore. Certainly the blockades and extension of the 100-day shipping window, that, as Antonina indicated, is coming up in a few weeks here. And so what happens to that could be pretty important. Rail infrastructure is another issue, and certainly, unfortunately, rail infrastructure can be targets for military action. So far, the conflict has been very localized, unfortunately, mostly to Ukraine. But if this begins to expand, and certainly the Crimea Bridge, if it leads to escalation of intensity, that becomes important. I think Turkey will continue to have an important role in the flow of commodity. Again, there's agreements saying that you can't ban transportation of food through those straits. But again, that's on paper, and unfortunately, sometimes paper agreements are broken. I think one of the things that I think about a lot, and I don't have an answer to this, and I have no idea whether or not this current conflict will rhyme some of the previous conflicts, but many of the price effects extend beyond the end of the conflict. And at least in the World War II situation, the severe impacts were more after the end of the conflict. And so these will be important things to think about once this Ukraine-Russia war ends. Ukrainian soils being central to conflict is not new, unfortunately, in terms of they were very important in both World War I and World War II. And with that, I kind of have the references of where I took a lot of this stuff from. There's a couple books there that are interesting to read. The first one is by Lambert. The second one is by Collingham. The one on Collingham is a difficult read, simply because it goes into more of some of the science of hunger and starvation and what that does to the human body. But again, it does kind of look at that. And the Collingham basically does a pretty good job of kind of recreating some of the discussions and what occurred kind of in the inner circles around World War II. And so with that, I think, Rich, we have a couple minutes for questions.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Great job, Alan. That was really, both presentations were really interesting and much appreciated. I guess my question is kind of just on a practical kind of data issue, and this may have been covered and I missed it, but with Russia now controlling some of Ukraine's territory, how do we think about kind of in the supply and demand? And Alan, you had mentioned, the amount of land planted in Ukraine, and then thinking about the land being planted in the occupied areas, the areas that are now occupied by Russia. With would the Russian occupation help or hurt some of that situation in those areas? And then when those numbers are ultimately reported, do those come out under Russia, or how kind of should we be thinking about all of that?
And Antonina can certainly jump on here and respond to that. But I think typically what happens is Russia tends to report production of commodities in occupied lands under their balance sheet. And I think that's kind of what Antonina was alluding to in some of her comments with regards to Russia. Their production was 90 million metric tons, and she thinks it's going to go up to 103, 104, maybe 105. And her thoughts are that they are counting that. Certainly, I think the Ukrainian numbers with regards to planning intentions exclude those regions that are under occupied territory, in that it's not clear if those areas will be planted or not. But I will let Antonina talk in terms of I'm on dangerous ground. She's more familiar with how those statistics are calculated.
You're right. You're right. Absolutely right. That Russia, in their official statistic, they include our territory and harvest that they got from our territories and stolen grain as well. And that is not only I do confirm that is USDA report confirmed that according to their sensitive data, they don't see this kind of high growth of they didn't expect that. So it lets us understand that this grain comes not from Russia. But in our estimates, we excluded all those occupied areas because we understand that even they will liberate it, we will not get any grain from there. First of all, because even when we liberate the areas, what Russia does after that, they just bomb those areas. They just wiped everything from that area, so there is nothing there. So unfortunately, we do not expect anything from occupied area. And it's also very difficult to predict how much we will have from those areas that are still under Ukrainian control. And I believe they will Ukrainians, but looking of those missile strikes, like 100 missiles per day, who knows where the next missile will arrive and how much land will be destroyed next day. For now, we lost 22% of our cultivated land. So it's hard to predict. It will depend how the war will develop. Hopefully we answer the questions.
There also is a question, Antonina. I think this one's better for you. What is the rail capacity to move grain to the EU if the grain corridor is over? And so how has that progressed? I know early on, there were hopes to, I think, move 2 million metric tons.
Yeah,
I believe.
For now, we are more than 1.5 million metric ton per month. And we are close to 2 million. I think by the end of the year, we will have 2 million.
But again, to put that in context, I think it's important to indicate that before the war, total export capacity was maybe 8 million a month with the ports and the rails.
No, that was only ports.
Okay, that was only ports.
At 8 million, that was capacity of ports, including Mariupol, that was not in use for several last years due to the that bridge that built illegally from Russia to our Crimea.
And then what was the total export via rail before the war? Would you have kind of a monthly estimate to that or not?
Yes, I do. And it's actually on my slide what's there. So before we had, in general, like 3.5.
3.5 million through rail and 8 through the ports. So basically total export capacity 11 to 12 million per month
but also by roads.
by roads also.
Yes. Yes. So yeah. So our export capacity were much higher than now, unfortunately. And just one short remarks, Alan, regarding your presentation. That was very interesting. I can discuss all that maps, etc. But just I want to clarify that since 1922, Ukraine became a part not of Russia but USSR. That is
Yes.
difference.
That's that's an important correction in terms of yep.